All right, welcome back everyone to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings, joined as always with my partner in crime here, Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. We've got into the swing of things in the wrestling world. Tony Khan's always got a big announcement coming up. You never know what it is. Sometimes it can be big, sometimes it can be small, but we got um, possibly something big happening in wrestling with Ring of Honor back, and definitely off to a good start, I would say. But I think everyone's always asking, what they're going to do with Ring of Honor, whether it's going to be a developmental system, whether what et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure we'll get more into that on today's show.
Yeah, it feels like an exciting time for wrestling. And one of the times I think the theme of today's show, which is kind of focusing on promotions in the United States outside of WWE and AEW, because we talk about those guys a ton. And this is good timing for that, is really an interesting time with a lot happening. I think, the pandemic kind of easing back out of our society, hopefully. A lot more independent shows popping up. You're getting some newer names in the indies kind of coming of age, and we're seeing them. There's a lot more talent out there on the independents than there was, during the height of the pandemic. And it does feel like an exciting time. It feels like New Japan in the US is on a good track. Looks like they're kind of building up some momentum again, which I think is tremendous, because that's been kind of lacking. You mentioned Ring of Honor, of course. I mean, Ring of Honor died last year, so it's I don't know if like Ring of Honor is in a better place necessarily than it was last year, as we kind of it's still in this realm of uncertainty. But the first Ring of Honor show as this kind of new Ring of Honor, the Tony Khan owned Ring of Honor, I think was a huge success. It apparently was financially for what they were expecting, so that's also good. But it just feels like a lot's happening. Like it feels like there's a lot. Still, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen over the summer that I think is going to be really exciting for the wrestling industry outside of the major two promotions. I think we got a lot of cool stuff happening, and it's a good time. It's been kind of a pessimistic time, during the pandemic. Of course, like how couldn't it be? But especially for kind of wrestling outside of AEW, WWE, kind of felt like, okay, we're going to these kind of two major main promotions, and then everything else is kind of going to be off to the side. And now it feels like there's a little bit more momentum being gained back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you also got that report that New Japan, they're working on foreign visas for, presumably US and other foreign talent to come into Japan for the big tournaments like the G1, Best Super Juniors. So that's definitely exciting to see, who they're potentially could bring in. Obviously everyone's, hoping for John Moxley to come into Japan and, get back to the G1. Jay White, of course, he's sort of been owning New Japan in the United States. He's been sort of the face of that, due to, I guess, Jay White is a star in his own right, but at the same time, it's kind of part of circumstance due to the pandemic, since, he doesn't want to be quarantining all the time in Japan. And so sort of an interesting situation with Jay White, where he, he's making appearances on Impact, AEW as part of Bullet Club. And, it's kind of interesting how New Japan have done that Bullet Club split, sort of with Gorillas of Destiny doing that over in Japan with the Hontai group and the other Japanese Bullet Club members, while they're also appearing on Impact Television, doing all the main stuff with the leader of Bullet Club, Jay White. And so it's kind of interesting how New Japan have sort of balanced out, how they do things in Japan, and also working on their U.S. expansion as well.
Yeah, New Japan over the last 2 or 3 years has kind of had interesting relationship with the United States. I think they lost a lot of momentum during the pandemic. They lost a lot of momentum. Look, they lost a lot of momentum when the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, who were their biggest stars in the United States, founded AEW and stopped working in New Japan. That was always going to hurt them in the US. The pandemic kind of preventing them from running major shows in the United States, from talent being able to come over here more easily. That obviously didn't help. But at the same time, while they maybe haven't gotten as big in the United States as they once were, they're a lot more consistent through New Japan Strong. There is consistent New Japan Pro Wrestling going on in the United States, pretty much on a weekly basis. I have a weekly show at least. So in that regards, it does feel like that they've made some inroads on that end and setting up kind of an American-based infrastructure for the company and partnering with AEW. And we'll talk more about the extent of that partnership, I'm sure. But it does feel like they've made, even though they definitely have regressed in a lot of ways as far as their notoriety and popularity in the States and really outside of Japan as a whole, they have also made a little bit of progress as far as gaining a little bit more consistency and kind of creating an American identity for the company, despite, the challenges of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they have their own champion here in the U.S. with Tom Lawler, and he's pretty much been the champion throughout Strong's history, and I think he's had a very good title reign. His feud of Fred Rosser is very good. He's even got his own faction, of course, of Team Filthy, and everyone else there is pretty solid. Kratos is a very strong monster heel, and West Coast Wrecking Crew, I think they're a pretty solid tag team as well. They'd be pretty fun to get in the World Tag League someday as well. And even Danny Limelight, he's always a very exciting star, and he signed with MLW. I don't even know if MLW is doing shows. I don't really think so. I haven't really heard about them, and so it's still nice to see Danny Limelight out there in the ring on Strong Television. And so yeah, it's been very fun to see all the interesting new stars that's probably aren't going to sign with WWE or AEW, but are still getting a chance to show their skills.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty good about who they've brought in. They have a really interesting mix. They go out and they have some like veteran indie guys, people like TJP, people like obviously Rocky Romero. He's with the company over a long time, but kind of fits that same thing. They signed Chris Dickinson, who is now kind of a bigger star than just like an indie guy. But they got some like veteran guys in to kind of help people work for lack of a better term, and to help some of their rookies and stuff like that. Just guys who know how to put together matches. They also have kind of, like you mentioned, like Danny Limelight. I did not mean to say that. Danny Limelight, in Kratos. These guys who were kind of not super well known in the United States, even though they were US indie guys, but giving them a platform, I think that's really shows like good scouting and understanding of who to bring in. They found people like the DKC and Kevin Knight, these people who had kind of just starting out with these minor indie careers, and kind of putting them at another level. I mean, they dug up Fred Rosser. We've talked about this before. Like, where was Fred Rosser before New Japan Strong? What was he doing? I don't really know, but he's been a complete revelation. He's really turned into I don't know if he's like a money drawing star, but he's a guy that I'm excited to see when he's on the shows. And that's that. Like they really have this mix of guys, American talents and Canadian talents that they've brought in that have created kind of a cool identity for the show, for the company. It's not like they just have these young lions and that's all they're doing, or they just kind of have these older guys and they'll bring in like, your Yuji Nagatas and Satoshi Kojimas, you're kind of like past their prime New Japan stars to kind of give them a star power boost. They really mix up the roster. They have young guys, they have older guys, they have guys in their prime, they have guys you've heard of, guys you haven't heard of. It really is an exciting mix. I think they've done a really good job with that talent. I don't know if that's Rocky Romero putting that together. I don't know if it's Shibata like going out and scouting all these talents at indie shows. My guess is probably heavily Rocky based, but I like their roster a lot just from a kind of an exciting standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the LA dojo, I'm not sure how much sort of control and influence Shibata does have. Obviously I'm sure he does I'm sure he is hands-on with the other sort of LA dojo graduates, your Carl Fredericks, Clark Connors, Alex Coughlin. I'm sure he's pretty hands-on with those guys, since those are his guys. But yeah, I'm not really sure of everyone else on the show. I guess Rocky has said in interviews that, hey, Shibata has been, scouting guys, even Tanahashi to some extent, watching over in Japan. I don't know that, again, I don't know if that's Rocky just being gracious in his assessments, or whether that's actually the truth or not. But still, clearly there is some thoughts put into Strong. It's not just an afterthought. Like you said, it's not just, hey, we're just sign a bunch of people, have them be young lions in the dojo, and this is just their show for them. Or, hey, Kojima and, Tenzan and, Nagata, they need some more, we need to, satisfy them and give them match time. And so here, we'll just put them on Strong. There's clearly some thought put into this, and they'll be willing to put on great matches. Earlier this year, Eddie Kingston and Gabriel Kidd, that went pretty semi-viral as a match. Like, hey, you should check out Strong to watch this specific match. And so, definitely Strong can once in a while put on, those, fantastic matches. And, again, the show is pretty much an hour long. And so it's not much of a commitment as well to watch Strong, whenever you can, because you just have to, spend an hour of your day just to watch, 3 wrestling matches at least.
And frankly, it's a really well booked show. Like,
Yep.
Will I say it's like, oh, there are these amazing angles you gotta watch and all this stuff like that. It's not at that level, and it's hard to be that without like major star power. But if you just want like a easy show to watch, and I'm sure if you go to the shows, that the storylines are easy to understand. They've done a really good job with Tom Lawler and Team Filthy in general, just being like, here's this kind of like bad heel faction, and the king of the faction is our champion, and here are the baby faces fighting to get underneath them. And then you have these other kind of storylines in the mid card that help round things out. But if you watch, it's very simple, very easy, and that's not always the case in pro wrestling, and it's not always the case outside of the larger promotions, is that these things can be scattershot, but there's a nice stability to the booking. Everything makes sense. Everything's very logical. It's like you said, it's an easy show to watch.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said before, Tom Lawler is a fantastic heel champion, and even his in-ring style is always diverse, and he's always bringing something new to the table. Again, with that Fred Rosser feud, I feel like every match of theirs, it wasn't like a crazy, like, 4.5 stars, 5-star matches, but like they're very solidly booked, and their feud was, you could tell the progression of the feud every week of like, okay, this is why Fred Rosser has a beef with Tom Lawler. Okay, Tom Lawler, he's thinking ahead. He's has all these strategies like against Fred Rosser, and it's very logical booking. And it was a very well booked feud for like 2 or 3 months that they feuded for the Strong title, and it was pretty well executed.
As far as like a business sense, they have the live tapings in Los Angeles, which are fine, and they've been running some events in the United States, some separate events. It's interesting because I think New Japan, you talk about things like the Madison Square Garden sellout, you talk about some of their bigger shows like the ones they had in Long Beach, California, and the one they had at the Cow Palace in the Bay Area. And so again, that's a standard that kind of was set for what New Japan Pro Wrestling can do in the United States. Obviously, the pandemic, not being able to get as much marquee talent over, in losing Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and Cody, who are these big business drivers, at least in the United States, you lose those guys. So you kind of had to, I think everyone has to kind of recalibrate their expectations for what like a major New Japan Pro Wrestling show is going to look like in the United States. And so so far this year, they've had, shows that I think would be considered very successful if you didn't, if you just look beyond like, okay, they're not doing, 14,000 people like they did at Madison Square Garden. They're not doing 8,000 people like they did at the Cow Palace or however many that show drew. But if you look at it, compare it in comparison to what every other non-WWE, non-AEW promotion has been doing, I would say that they're looking pretty good.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that, like, obviously compared to before, they're not doing as well. But like if you just look at the current wrestling landscape, I think GCW definitely gets the publicity in terms of having the hype for shows, and obviously that goes to their talent on the social media game, and having a good promoter in Brett Lauderdale, promoting these shows and building the hype for these shows. But still, if you look at just the numbers, like New Japan at times can outsell a GCW show in comparable or circumstances. Like New Japan's business is doing pretty well, and I don't think that attention gets hyped that often. And I think people like I believe Joe and Rich over at Voices of Wrestling, they point that out on their flagship podcast. Even Lavi Margolin from the business of the business, he sort of mentioned like at times, hey, New Japan, their business is doing pretty well, compared to under the current wrestling landscape. And for GCW, I think they're just better at the promotion game and the social media game, that they could get more attention and more eyes. But still, for the business side of things, at the pure numbers, it's not that much of a sort of not that much of a divide between GCW and New Japan in terms of the US shows.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, like I think like GCW, for example, like runs a lot of shows.
Yeah.
So that it's not like a one-to-one comparison, but right, if GCW, we do have this interpretation where it's like GCW does 800 fans. It's a great house for GCW. New Japan Pro Wrestling does 800 fans. Like, oh my God, no one's coming to New Japan. New Japan's dead in the United States.
Right.
And I get that New Japan has the standard, like I discussed, of selling out Madison Square Garden. Okay. So obviously they're well below that. But if you just look at them objectively from where do they fit in on the American wrestling map, they really draw better than anybody else outside of AEW and WWE. They had their biggest show last year, I think, was probably the show at the LA Memorial Coliseum, the Torch show. WrestleTix had that at 2,240 people. The list of shows not WWE or AEW that are doing 2,240 people can probably be counted on one hand. It's maybe like a couple of really special indie, like maybe like new Northeast Wrestling in outside of New York City, maybe like a lucha show on the US-Mexico border or near them. Those are the only promotions that are really doing 2,000 people. I guess the Hammerstein show from GCW, which obviously was a big success from an attendance standpoint, would be like the big GCW show you'd point to as saying rivaling that number. But if you look at like kind of the business that they've done, it's still good. Like like I was looking at the New Japan ran a Strong Style Evolved show in St. Petersburg, Florida last month, and WrestleTix has it at about 700 people. And that was kind of seen as like this big disappointment, but it's like, hey man, you know how many indie shows are doing 700 people? Not a whole lot. So if we just look at it to scale, it's not that big of a difference.
Yeah, and I think their upcoming show in Chicago, or at least in Villa Park, Illinois, like I've seen WrestleTix. They have like over 1,600 people for that show.
WrestleTix has that one is sold out at just about 2,100 people.
Oh, okay, I must be looking at an old tweet then. Yeah, but definitely. Like their upcoming show is selling pretty well, and so like the business is again slowly getting better. Obviously not as close as it was before. They were going to do Madison Square Garden before the pandemic came in, and so who knows how well that they would have done during that time. But again, they are building more momentum, and again, as if they can get more of the talents kind of freed up in terms of travel back and forth between the US and Japan, maybe that can help add more star power to the strong shows, as they are building some star power within their own limitations, as well as they were this past year.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that US roster and I just see a lot of guys that are looking and need to wrestle in other places that aren't just New Japan Strong. They're ready to break out. You obviously have the kind of original new LA Dojo Young Lions class like Carl Fredericks and Alex Coughlin. these are guys that are really ready to go to Japan and to do a tour of New Japan and to work maybe in other places that New Japan has working relationships with, like Rev Pro in UK and other US indies, or perhaps even AEW. Those are guys that are like, you need them to they're ready to take their next step in their career, but they've kind of been in this stasis where they don't really have a lot of options due to the pandemic and due to travel. And that's something hopefully we see taken care of. Like we talked about the visas getting approved, like that's probably what has been keeping those talents like, Coughlin and Clark Connors and Carl Fredericks, like these guys who I all think are very talented, from kind of branching out further and establishing themselves both on the New Japan brand, the flagship New Japan, which would be New Japan in Japan, which in turn would give them more credibility in the US market if, Carl Fredericks was working a G1. And then, other guys like, whether it's Tom Lawler or Kratos or Fred Rosser or these other kind of guys who are more like main event guys in New Japan strong, those guys also probably deserve a shot in working in New Japan, or to appear on a major New Japan show in Japan. And hopefully that's something that can be taken care of shortly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Carl Fredericks, he won the Young Lion Cup before the pandemic. And so clearly New Japan see something in him that they want to explore more. And so hopefully he gets that chance in the future. And I think the biggest domino here is Jay White himself. Like, what's his future going to look like? I know Juice Robinson, it's been reported that, he'll be leaving New Japan once his contract expires. And so, like, what's, Jay White, he's been asked, oh, are you going to sign AEW? He's sort of shut down those talks recently. I think he was on the oral sessions with Renee Paquette, and he was asked about that. For AEW, he's like, oh no, I'm just appearing there once in a while, but I'm still committed to New Japan. And he has been making the rounds in the indies. He's been appearing on Warrior Wrestling. He's even done appeared on other shows other than AEW. Impact, I said earlier. He's pretty much a mainstay on that show. He even wrestled against Chris Sabin on the Big Impact show as well during WrestleMania weekend. And so I'm very curious to see like what his trajectory is going to look like. Well, whether he'll be challenging Okada sometime this year for the title, assuming Okada keeps the title for a good while, because he's a former champion and he hasn't really fought for any championships. He hasn't even challenged Tom Lawler for the strong championships. So I would say clearly that they see bigger things for him, but I guess maybe they're just waiting for the right time, perhaps. And maybe this year could be the time to strike in terms of Jay White back in the championship fold.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, but Jay White was main eventing Wrestle Kingdom. Like he was. Yeah. He's, former IWGP World Champion. Like he was a top guy in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I feel like in a lot of ways, he's been just kind of wandering around in the wilderness of the United States, appearing in all these different promotions. And it's in some ways, it's probably helped him because he's popping up in new places and he gets his name in the news. But I expected major things for him coming off of the Wrestle Kingdom. His loss to Kota Ibushi. And, he's really not been that big of a part of the company, at least in Japan, since then. I think the other major thing I would say would really help New Japan, kind of reaffirm its grasp in the United States. And hopefully we're seeing this soon. There's some rumors about it already, is getting the major AEW stars back into the fold when it comes to New Japan Pro Wrestling in Japan and kind of helping them establish that. I think you don't hear a lot of buzz you don't hear the same kind of buzz for like the G1 and major New Japan, events as you used to a couple of years ago. But I think if Jon Moxley's in the G1, if Bryan Danielson is in the G1, you're absolutely going to hear about it. It's going to be, I'll just use Danielson as a good example because he's someone that said publicly that he really wants to do the G1, and I don't really see what could be stopping him from doing it if if the visas get taken care of and he's satisfied with his ability to go to Japan and he won't have to quarantine or anything like that. That's gonna be an everyday thing. It's gonna be tremendous because everyone's gonna be like, did you see Danielson's match? Because he's gonna be going all out. He's gonna be wanting to have the best match possible. He's gonna be having these literal dream matches against basically anyone that's in this block. So like it's gonna be a big deal. It's gonna be really fun to watch that as a fan of New Japan in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, even like the young guys like Daniel Garcia or Lee Moriarty, that'd be very fun to see those guys, whether it is G1 or even best of the Super Juniors. Like those guys could pass off as juniors if you wanted to, and so like it'd be very exciting to see those guys in the mix also.
Yeah, I mean that's more interesting for like weird perverts like you or me and probably everyone that's listening to the show, in the sense that like, oh man, I'd love to see Daniel Garcia do a tour of New Japan. Like I don't think like the kind of casual New Japan fan
Sure.
is like super into that, but like obviously like people who are really into some of the young prospects in AEW and understand what working in New Japan could be for those guys. I mean, the possibility, we talked about this a million times when we talked about the Forbidden Door. The possibilities are endless for talent sharing. I would love to see, especially we talk about like the World Tag League and the Junior Tag League. Those kind of events kind of feel lackluster because not a ton of effort is put into the tag division, either at the heavyweight or junior heavyweight work in New Japan. And it's like, man, if you just took a couple of new like AEW teams, they wouldn't even have to be like your top teams. Like just take your private parties and your top flights and put them in the junior heavyweight, the junior tag league. Like that makes that event so much more interesting to me as a fan. And obviously for the heavyweight, you could put anyone from the Young Bucks to, Jurassic Express to FTR to any of their tag teams, and it would probably make things more interesting just from an American standpoint. But I do think kind of connecting your major stars back, your major American stars back with New Japan Pro Wrestling is really important. I mean, the Windy City Riot show, the Chicago show, we talked about, how good ticket sales have been for that. They've sold the venue out. They probably could have sold more tickets if they were set up for more, I would imagine. But, that's a major show. And why is that a major show? And it's like, well, because Jon Moxley is on it and he's on the main event and he's wrestling Will Ospreay, and it's this highly anticipated match. And Jon Moxley is a certified top star in the United States. He moves business, whether he's in AEW or he's working for New Japan. And I think New Japan kind of needs to get their hands back on some of that talent and associate it with their brands, and everything will grow from that. It's just how, people who were not Okada or people who were not Omega and the Young Bucks benefited in the American market by those guys getting really big. Like Minoru Suzuki is not having his bi-monthly lucrative tour of every indie in the United States if the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega didn't put a lot of Western eyeballs on the Japanese product. And I think that'll be key to kind of help building them up in the United States again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for New Japan's perspective, that would be their gain. Very curious now with Ring of Honor under the control of Tony Khan, though, that, I'm sure Tony Khan would like to boost the brand of Ring of Honor first. That'd be his first priority. And of course, you have many stars like a Bryan Danielson who are very much closely associated with Ring of Honor. And so very curious where the priorities lie for Tony Khan in terms of between Ring of Honor and New Japan, since now he controls Ring of Honor now.
Yes, it's very interesting. We're going to switch gears to kind of talk about Ring of Honor. The dynamic of Ring of Honor was very strange in a lot of ways. They had it's like if you watch the show that they ran on WrestleMania weekend and you've watched kind of how Ring of Honor has been treated on AEW television, it's all one and the same. They've shot angles on AEW to kind of get people excited about Ring of Honor. They've brought in the Ring of Honor titles, obviously. They used the Ring of Honor show to shoot an angle for a match on Dynamite the following Wednesday. So I don't really know. We don't really know. And Tony's been kind of hasn't been particularly declarative about what the new Ring of Honor is going to look like. I'm not even sure he knows what it's going to look like. I thought they put together a great show on WrestleMania weekend. I thought it led to a lot of interesting places. I liked the return of Samoa Joe and how that whole angle went down with Jay Lethal. It was better than the angle between Samoa Joe and Jay Lethal on Dynamite.
Yeah.
But it was we don't, like, some people have theorized, like, is Ring of Honor like going to be like this second brand for AEW, and they're going to tour under the Ring of Honor name, but they're going to have all AEW talent? Is it going to be like a developmental league where like some of the AEW's greener talent, younger talent will be able to work longer matches, you know, in a different kind of setting where there maybe is less pressure on them to succeed than wrestling on TNT or TBS? It's very, you know, are they going to run a lot of shows at all, or is it just going to be using the Ring of Honor tape library and maybe the Ring of Honor title belts? We don't really know. I mean, you look at the card and you look at the card from the show on WrestleMania weekend, and it's like, this isn't a card of, like, you know, your young green AEW talent. It's, you know, I guess you could say like someone like Liam Moriarty's young, but it's like, it's FTR, it's, you know, some of the, it's Swerve Strickland, it's Brian Cage, it's Jay Lethal. It's not necessarily like they're putting all these newly signed people on the show. It's kind of like, well, let's just try to have a good show. And I think they need to kind of figure out if they're going to transition away from the Ring of Honor, like some of the, like, the established Ring of Honor names that maybe aren't going to be a part of AEW. It was a big deal. It was kind of like everyone that wasn't signed to AEW basically lost. Like, Wheeler Yuta beats Josh Woods. One of those guys is signed to AEW. One of those guys is not. You know, Mercedes Martinez beat Willow Nightingale. One of those people is signed with AEW. One of those is not, that we know of.
Yeah.
You know, all these kind of things. Brian Cage squashes Ninja Mac. You know, Swerve Strickland beat Alex Zane. All these things is kind of like protecting the AEW names. But I don't know how typical that show from WrestleMania weekend is going to be of the Ring of Honor we see going forward.
Yeah, because back when Ring of Honor announced their hiatus, they kind of still promised that Supercard of Honor would still happen. I think I was still pretty vague on that, but I think for the most part, people were kind of expecting this show to still happen at its time. Obviously, Tony Khan, once he purchased Ring of Honor, he also made those same promises that, hey, we'll still do Supercard of Honor, and, you know, Jonathan Gresham and Bandito will have, you know, their sort of unification match for the Ring of Honor title. But other than that, you know, even back then with Ring of Honor, there was no guarantees that there would be future shows. And, well, on one hand, I do appreciate that Tony Khan is still keeping the surprises going for Ring of Honor. You know, you still want to keep up the buzz and, you know, the hype up these announcements for the future of the show. But at the same time, you know, I think, you know, like you mentioned earlier, you know, Ring of Honor has, you know, basically died last year, and, you know, it's not really a brand that, you know, you can keep sort of under wraps for too long. You know, it's a brand that needs to be hyped up and needs to gain back its recognition. And I don't know how long you keep this going, of sort of like, oh, you know, just wait and see, you know, what, something big is gonna happen, you know, oh, you guys are gonna be excited, you know, I'm doing something big at Ring of Honor. Like, okay, you can keep saying this, but still, like, fans need to know what the importance of Ring of Honor. You know, is this worth watching? Do I need to watch this to follow up on feuds on Dynamite? And even then, like, maybe the Ring of Honor stuff might be better played on Ring of Honor television or on shows than what they show on Dynamite. You know, it's very much murky in terms of all that. And even then, like you mentioned, you know, everyone who won basically were on AEW contracts, except for, like, you know, the TV title, but it's Suzuki against Red Titus. And even then, that was just more of a traditional type of thing for Dynamite. And, you know, there was like a mention of, like, okay, now we're just introducing even more titles along with the ones that AEW already has, which, for me personally, I didn't really mind the amount of titles that AEW has. But if you're including Ring of Honor stuff in there, especially now it's all basically under the same umbrella, you know, it's different than New Japan introducing their titles, you know, because, or Impact as well, because those are just other promotions. But still, like, Ring of Honor is basically under the same umbrella as AEW. And so that's kind of a different story there in terms of introducing more titles. And so again, it's just all murky waters. And I do appreciate that the surprises are being kept hidden, but still, you gotta strike when the iron's hot, especially coming off a very good show and Super Card of Honor.
Yeah, and it sold 2,000 tickets, which I think would make it the biggest show of WrestleMania weekend, probably by a decent margin. And Tony said that, I forgot the number that was tossed around, but they did way more pay-per-view buys than they originally thought they were going to do. So from a financial standpoint, the show was successful. I definitely think there was a lot of interest in seeing what was going to happen and who would show up. And to that regard, they didn't disappoint because the FTR versus Briscoes match was very well received. It was the perfect match for what they wanted to have. And then you had the angle with the Young Bucks coming out at the end. And of course, you closed the show with Samoa Joe's basically Samoa Joe's AEW debut, which happened on the Ring of Honor show. That ends up taking place. So I think you deliver on your what fans were expecting, which is like this very strong card that will have some exciting things happen. Moving forward, I don't know, are they going to continue to, are they going to have weekly television? Are they going to have a TV deal somewhere? And they're going to do TV tapings. I think that will be a big challenge for the company and a big challenge staying interest. I think just from not looking at it as much from a business standpoint, but just for as what do I, Jesse, the fan, want to see is I would like to see Ring of Honor become this, maybe 8 to 12 events a year, maybe. So basically once a month. You can have them on the Saturdays or Fridays before your major pay-per-views in the same city for traveling fans, and just have these shows that you have, some of your major AEW talents, but you also have some of your younger talents, and you kind of experiment with some stuff. I liked on the show, they had something they had Tully Blanchard come out with Brian Cage, and they had I can't remember, is it Moses or Quan that's with Cage? I think it's Quan.
That sounds right.
And then I forget his name, Toa Leona or something, whoever that is. The big guy who's been on Dark for a while. They kind of okay, here's this new Tully Blanchard is here. He's got Brian Cage, who we hadn't seen in AEW in a while. He's, and now he's got this big monster unit. Just kind of an idea. It's let's get these guys over. Let's see what they can do. And if the act works, maybe we'll move it to Dynamite, or maybe we'll use them as the kind of anchor Ring of Honor. And it's almost like an informal territory, not as much developmental. I don't know if it's going to be let's take all these green people and put them on this show. I think it's more like a place to keep some people busy if they don't have anything right for them on AEW Dynamite. And you maybe have a little bit more freedom with what these guys can experiment with their characters. Maybe you can bring in some different kind of people that maybe you don't necessarily want to sign to contracts with AEW, but maybe you bring them in and they'll have an interesting match, and you can sprinkle in some of the familiar Ring of Honor names, people like your Dalton Castles and your Silas Youngs, and just kind of people to kind of keep the brand up. And you have 12 shows a year. They're really good shows. You load up the cards with different types of matches. You sprinkle in things like the Ring of Honor Pure Championship, and you can use Gresham, who still has the title. That would be my version of Ring of Honor that I would like to see. I don't know if financially if that's the smartest business way to use it, but that would be the way that I think I'd be the most interested in it, would be to be this kind of thing that's very easy to follow. It's easy to watch all of the shows. It's not that you don't have to, as a fan, don't have to commit to a lot of them, but it's really high quality, and it allows you to kind of experiment with different things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that aspect of it being easy to watch and sort of being easy to access. I think some people have theorized that Tony Khan's upcoming announcements will be some type of television deal for Ring of Honor. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The whole Discovery merger might put a wrinkle in that, perhaps, but still, either way, I do agree with you that having at least one big show a year will help Ring of Honor, or every other month, perhaps, having a big show to keep attention on the brand and really keep it in sort of the wrestling zeitgeist. It should not, Ring of Honor should not be an afterthought. It should not be like an AEW Dark or Dark Elevation, where it's just kind of whatever. You can kind of watch it whenever you want. I think it should be something worth watching every week or whatever, every month or whatever. And I'm very curious also about the women's division. That was a big thing going on back when Ring of Honor was making their comeback. Maria Kanellis, she was spearheading that, and they had their new champion Roxy. She was expected to be that young upstarts to really anchor that division. Obviously now she's in WWE, signing over there after Ring of Honor folded, and they had the one women's match for the title, the vacant title, that Mercedes Martinez won. And so I don't know if they're going to present her as this sort of veteran heel figure that maybe some young baby face will have to challenge her against her for that title, perhaps. But still, it could be another place to have more of your newer women's talents, get more TV time, just, continuing that progression over there, while you could have, the bigger matches, with your Thunder Rosas and Jade Cargills on Dynamite and, proper AEW, while you could have, so still some good matches, but still nothing, I guess, that high stakes, still high stakes enough, outside of Dark Elevation in Ring of Honor, but still, if you really want to have your marquee matches, you can save those for AEW proper.
Yeah, I think that, well, so the women's division, so I guess the idea is that they're going to do a Mercedes Martinez, Deonna Purrazzo match eventually, and
that's what it looks like. Yeah,
Deonna wasn't available for the Ring of Honor show over WrestleMania weekend, so they, people are saying, like, why couldn't you just do a number one contenders match? Why have an interim champion? I don't know why you would do that. Perhaps there's less guarantee that Deonna will be around in the future, so we will eventually maybe just be like, Mercedes Martinez is the real champion now, not you, Deonna. But that's just me speculating. I don't really know anything about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it can be, I don't know if Ring of Honor is going to run regularly enough to be true developmental.
That's true.
Like if in my version, they're running like 8 to 12 shows a year, that's like one show a month. That's not necessarily like going to be like a big difference for a lot of these people. They're better off working indies where they could work multiple shows per weekend, if they can get the work, than if having something else. I just think it gives another venue for people to experiment with ideas and characters. We've seen AEW kind of occasionally, not a ton, but they've tried certain kind of angles and new groups or new gimmicks, and they haven't worked. They kind of flopped. And then Tony's pretty quick at being like, this isn't working. We either got to change it, or we got to or we're getting rid of it and we're never going to talk about it again. Maybe Ring of Honor serves as like an area where you maybe could experiment with some different stuff and see, and you're not being put under the microscope as much. It's a very difficult situation for a lot of AEW talent at the moment, because the company is still so new, and every week people are looking at their ratings and they're being like, okay, is it going to do big? Is it going to do bad? Every single segment gets judged pretty harshly, a lot because the standard is really high. And so it can be really hard as a maybe a lesser experienced talent to go out there on a Dynamite and be like, here's 7 minutes, and if it's bad, everyone's going to talk about this and no one will remember what was good on the show. At least ROH gives it in kind of a different dynamic a chance for them to kind of establish themselves without that kind of pressure. And you can say that Dark is that. And that's true, that Dark is a place where these people can like learn more. But Ring of Honor is like, it's kind of like a halfway point between being like Dark, which like doesn't matter at all. You don't have to pay attention really. The only thing that matters on Dark is if someone wins a bunch of matches on Dark, and then like, okay, that person's probably going to be on Dynamite, and they're probably going to say like, this person's won 20 of their last 22 matches. That's all that matters on Dark. The actual results other than that don't matter. No one talks about Dark results. But Ring of Honor gives you a middle ground where it's like, yeah, it's important. Your match on Ring of Honor is important, but it's not this do or die, has to be good. We're getting ready to negotiate our big TV deal. It's going to solidify this company as a major player over the long term in pro wrestling. it gives it all like, I guess it's kind of like a balance between not too much pressure, but enough pressure and enough momentum to make it feel important. I think that's a healthy spot for some people on the roster to be. I mean, Wheeler Yuta greatly, I think, greatly exceeded expectations in his match against John Moxley a week ago. But I think like he's someone that could do well, like if they push him in Ring of Honor and he has like kind of these longer 20-minute matches in Ring of Honor that are positioned as very important. And if you do that in AEW, people might not care or buy it as much. And I think there's, like I said, like a healthy balance between the two.
Yeah, I mean, just to be frank, like the Satnam Singh debut would not be as heavily criticized if it was done on Ring of Honor than a main event on Dynamite. Like if they did it on the main event of Ring of Honor, people would still say it was pretty awkward and not greatly executed, but they wouldn't be heavily criticizing it as people did at the end of Dynamite, where Satnam Singh debuts and people are like, who the hell is this guy? Like, I've never seen this guy in my life. I vaguely remember the announcement that they signed him, but still, I have no idea who this guy is and why is he on national television on my screen. Like,
Why is he beating up Samoa Joe?
Exactly.
I mean,
like, how is this guy really good enough to be Samoa Joe?
Yeah, I mean, the Satnam Singh thing, I think, was solely the idea was that I don't think Tony was like, people are all going to know who Satnam Singh is.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think the idea was like, this guy's enormous, so people will not care. The people will be curious to know who this enormous person is and not like just immediately shit on it. I think that's it. But I do think it showed a difference between maybe like WWE fans and AEW fans, where AEW fans have been conditioned when the lights go off and someone shows up that it's like a recognizable name. And that like, if it's someone, I don't care what they look like, if it's somebody that they've never seen before, people are going to be like, who the fuck is that? As opposed to in WWE, where I think that people are like, I don't know, like more like, I don't say like appreciative, but they'd understand that this is something that WWE normally does. And so they accept it as a normal part of the story, as opposed to AEW, it's very atypical. And I think that's where things went off the rail. But I think you're right in the sense that if Singh had debuted in Ring of Honor, and if Singh was like wrecking people in Ring of Honor, and then he showed up on Dynamite, it wouldn't have gone over as poorly. I don't know how many matches Singh has had in his life. I don't even know if he's ever appeared on Dark before. I just know he's been a training, with QT Marshall and Dustin at they didn't call it the Nightmare Factory on television. They called it like the Atlanta-based training facility, but It was the Nightmare Factory. So I don't know how many matches he's had, so I don't really know like if he's even built up a rep to people who I only know about him because I remember him. I don't want to turn this, we're going to move on. I don't want to talk about like my entire background knowledge of Satnam Singh, but I remember reading about him when he was a teenager because there was a long ESPN the Magazine article about him that I remember reading like 10 years ago. But it is one of those things where I think, it gives you a chance to experiment on it. Like Brian Cage and Blanchard's new group, if they wreck people in Ring of Honor for a while and they show up like in 6 months in AEW, I think people, not everyone's going to know, but more of the fan base who's been paying attention will know like, oh, okay, these guys are here now. And this is like this new monster group and we recognize them and they're not going to be getting the, who are you chance.
Yeah, they'll definitely be a lot more polished by the time they get to AEW, to where, even for those who haven't been pay attention to Ring of Honor, they won't come off as amateurish or, as sort of lost on AEW television once they've gotten the reps and they've gotten familiarity together as a group. Definitely come off a lot more better appearing on national television than they would, just going straight out there after, only a couple of months of, just doing their own thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where Ring of Honor's relationship with AEW is going to come into play the best. I think eventually everyone on that appears in Ring of Honor, with maybe like 1 or 2 exceptions, is going to be a AEW contracted wrestler. It's just going to vary on how much they appear on Dynamite versus how much are they kind of in the background in between phases of their storylines or whatever. But it keeps people off TV. Like everyone complains about AEW having too many, not everyone, but there's a common complaint, which is that AEW has too big of a roster and how all these people aren't going to get TV time. And it's like, I don't know. I kind of like it that they like people get time off TV, and like it's probably healthy. It's healthy for everyone that someone like Britt Baker, who's like a top star and their biggest star in the women's division, is off TV for like a month or so. It's I think that's healthy. I think it prevents people from getting stale, and it gives other people an opportunity to get over, and allows the company to absorb things like, going through a long stretch of time where you didn't have Kenny Omega and you didn't have John Moxley.
And even Kenny Omega is, ever since he lost the title to Adam Page, has been out for a long while. And, it allows for Adam Page to be himself and to really grow as a champion and have challengers like Adam Cole really step up. And, obviously he came in as a star from WWE, but he gets to be a star in AEW television and gets time to do that. And yeah, just allows people to grow into stars. That's how you grow stars, by having your old stars, take a break once in a while, and they'll come back when they're needed, for a big angle or for a big match. That's just a natural progression of things. Obviously, if those things are communicated well to those people, which I assume it is, that's a good thing. I think the problem that always arises is mostly a WWE problem, when people are not told, that they're not doing anything, like Mustafa Ali, like, for example, it's like, oh, do you have anything for me? No. And then it's like, oh, can I leave? No. And then that's where the problem arises. For AEW, I just presume that, Tony Khan has plans for people, and he'll communicate those plans well to others, and the other people are open to have their own feedback. Like, hey, I want to start my own group. Maybe Brian Cage or Tully Blanchard came up with this idea for this group, and they asked Tony Khan about this, and it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. You guys can do that, and there's this open communication between everyone in the company, which is what I presume is going on backstage.
Yeah, no, definitely. We want to talk about GCW for a bit. So Game Changer Wrestling has really emerged as the most prominent true independent company in the United States. They run a ton of shows. They run across the country. They have kind of really taken a big hold on WrestleMania weekend. They have run a bunch of shows through, the Collective, which is kind of their branding term for a lot of their various shows. Some of them have themes, but they've definitely established themselves as the key player in what I would consider like true independent pro wrestling, not directly affiliated with a larger company, with the exception of Nick Gage not really signing any talents to exclusive deals, just kind of being like a true independent company. I think there's a lot of mixed feelings about Game Changer Wrestling across wrestling. They have a very loyal fan base of fans. The product, I think, is pretty polarizing. I am not a huge fan of it personally. And sometimes, as we mentioned, I think their success is sometimes overblown in the sense that people react to it, I think, and hype it up as maybe bigger than it really is relative to the rest of independent wrestling. But it definitely is the company that is getting the most buzz and the most hype. What are just your kind of general thoughts on GCW over the past, year or two?
Yeah, I mean, GCW, to their credit, they've grown to the position that they're in, and I would say it's well deserved in terms of the hype. And they clearly have a loyal fan base, and that's nothing to gloss over. They clearly have worked hard to build that fan base over the years. And I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Jesse, where like I'm not the biggest fan of GCW. I kind of think that the hype for the matches kind of overtakes the match quality when that matches actually happen. I've always go back to like, oh, Minoru Suzuki and Jonathan Gresham had a match at GCW, and people were very hyped up, as they should be, for that kind of match. But as for the match itself, it was fine. It was decent. It was sadly kind of forgettable because they just had a very standard type of match. But in terms of hype for the matches, they always get a lot of hype, and that's always a good thing in terms of obviously you want people to buy tickets to go to the shows or buy the shows on Fight TV. And so that's very good in terms of building up the hype for the matches. But once you get to the matches, it's kind of a different story. I think the same can be said for the Hammerstein Ballroom show, where obviously the hype was very huge for that show. It did a lot of good business for the most parts, definitely live attendance wise. I think Fight TV hyped up, the show as well. But in terms of the show itself, not that great, I would say, at least in my personal opinion, for the Hammerstein Ballroom show. But still, again, they do a good job at getting people excited, anticipating for these shows. And, even Joey Janela's Spring Break is something that people look forward to every single year. Anytime Joey Janela does do one of these shows, but still, once you actually watch the shows, they are what they are. If you enjoy them, good for you. But for me, it's not really always something I enjoy on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the Hammerstein show was really interesting because it was, at one hand, this huge high point for the company. Obviously, it was it has to be their most viewed show, I think, ever. I think their pay-per-view numbers, I don't know, I heard mixed results. I don't know. It depends what your expectations were. I think some people thought that they were disappointing, but it had way more hype than any other independent show that I can really remember, unless, outside of things like All Out.
All in.
All In, yes. Sorry. I can never remember. I call All Out All In sometimes.
Yeah.
And when I mean to say All Out, I sometimes say All In as well. But it had a lot of hype. It obviously sold a lot of tickets because they sold out Hammerstein Ballroom. But what happened with that show was that a lot of people who weren't like regular GCW watchers were like, watched it and they were like, this shit sucks. And it was it was not a good show for them. They had to rush through this main event that was like 4 minutes long. And I think it was a tough pill for a lot of the whether you're GCW talent or promoters or fans. It was a tough pill to kind of swallow, because you're kind of living in somewhat of a bubble where your hardcore fans are really interested and like all the things you do. That's why they're your fans. And then kind of outside people who aren't, whether they don't really know that much about GCW or they're not particularly, it doesn't have particularly a lot of appeal to them, but they're tuning in because it's this massive show, and then they rip that show apart. That's kind of tough to swallow, because it's hard to read a lot of those negative things when you feel like you've been doing so well and you kind of live in this, I don't want to say a bubble, because that involves like that, like, oh, they're delicate, they can't live outside their bubble. I think it's more just like you're living in this, you're kind of in this area where you're getting a lot of consistent positive feedback, and the negative feedback is largely filtered out by people who aren't watching the show, and so they're not commenting on it. And so I think that was tough to see, and it kind of feels like I don't say like it derailed their momentum at all, because I don't think that's really any evidence to suggest that's true, but it felt like kind of like, okay, if you're going to be big time and you're going to run Hammerstein, you're going to go on pay-per-view, you're going to get judged by a lot of people who are not going to like what you're doing. And I don't think it's unfair criticism for the most part, but it is something that you're going to have to take. And I don't know. And it's not good. Like, they didn't put their best foot forward with the world, the Hammerstein show. It was not the best GCW show they could present. And I think that, it's the risk reward factor. The reward is that you get a lot of eyeballs, but the risk are that if you blow it, people aren't, it's going to look really bad for your company, and they might not give it a second chance.
Yeah, definitely exposed, at least in my eyes, the limited scope that GCW can have. I think they'll, especially with bad first impression, they show that they will struggle to build new audiences. Obviously, I don't want to get into like, oh, the mainstream fans who aren't going to care about it. Like, I don't want to get into that sort of talking points, but still, like, yeah, like people who don't normally watch GCW, they'll be in for a different experience. For the most part, like, GCW shows like are pretty consistent in terms of what they are, but sometimes they can't be pretty bad and not put the best foot forward, like you said, in that Hammerstein show. But for the most part, like, GCW shows are pretty consistent in terms of what they are. I remember covering the Matt Cardona stuff, and he definitely has built, I think his character is definitely something that is that stands out in terms of the GCW world, because he understands what he's doing for his character. He knows the GCW audience well enough to really be a polarizing character in that world. And so I'm sure he's bringing in a lot of different fans from his fan base himself. And, you know, but even then, that's still a very limited scope of the new fans that you're going to get for your promotion. I think for the most part, you know, for the people who love GCW, they'll continue following it. But still, you know, you're going to continue to have, like, even this year, at WrestleMania weekend, you know, Chris Dickinson had a match against Minoru Suzuki. Once again, Minoru Suzuki match that gets very much hyped up. You know, Chris Dickinson making his return from his injury, but still, like, it was a fine match. Like, there's nothing much else to go home about that match itself, which should be big, and it was hyped up as big, but wasn't really live up to the hype.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Suzuki on these indie tours he does when it comes to the United States is he's going out there and he's playing the hits, and he's not trying to like kill. He's not going to kill himself, and so there's a lot of hype because he's got, you know, he's managed to accrue this, you know, American following on the US independents as like this, you know, really like this, like almost like this, like Brock Lesnar like figure, where he's like, oh my God, this guy's like a killer. He's such a monster star. And he goes out there and he kind of is just like, he's not gonna. I'm sure he's very pleased with it. And it's like, yeah, just like you said, fine matches. He's not going out there. You know, his match versus Samoa Joe obviously was really good. His match against Bryan Danielson, but that's, you know, he's wrestling on national American television. He's obviously going to bring it, but he's going out there and he's wrestling in front of 500 people in the US. And he's like, all right, you guys are getting like you're getting, you know, I'm going to do my spots. I'm going to make my angry faces, and I'm going to chop people, and everyone will applaud it. And like, he's not going to go out there and try to you know, steal the show. He doesn't have to.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, with the other thing with GCW is, it's there's some, you know, they lost Ricky Shane Page, who was, you know, Nick Gage is their biggest star, but Ricky Shane Page was their biggest antagonist and was the main guy feuding with Nick Gage, you know, throughout, you know, what I would consider like their big periods during the pandemic. And you could say he's been replaced by Matt Cardona, which is true, but it's kind of a blow that they lost him. And they lost Atticus Cogar, who, and when I mean lost, I mean these guys had some sort of mysterious falling out with the promotion and are no longer being booked. It's not like they were signed by people. So, you know, Cogar was, I'm not a deathmatch guy, but most, I know deathmatch people were like, Cogar is, you know, the best, you know, rising star in deathmatch promotion. And obviously that's a big part of GCW's appeal. So you're kind of losing guys that you really shouldn't be losing. I don't know what the specific situations are around why those guys no longer work with the company, depending on which side you ask. They have different versions of why they're no longer working with the company. But to me, it's like, I don't know, you have all this growth and by your nature, you're going to lose some of your top stars because they're going to get signed by other guys. Losing people like you know, Ricky Shane Page and his whole crew and Cogar, that's not like a great look, because those are guys that you kind of are banking on to be around for a while, because the style of match that they do is going to be kind of limited in scope and kind of right in your wheelhouse, as opposed to a young rising star that you're going to lose in a year. And I kind of get that sense with GCW to a degree. Everyone compares it to ECW, but I didn't really get those vibes. But one thing I'll say about it is that like they have, as their talent kind of leaves or gets picked off, they're left with like kind of their GCW staples, like people like Alley Catch and people like Effie, and those are extremely niche people. You know, they have done really well for themselves from a career standpoint to get a cult following, but I think if those are like your main people, they're going to have a limited ceiling on it. I mean, you could say the same about Gage, but I think Gage was at least like a real definitive business mover, and it was at kind of like a different level than you know, your Effies or your Alley Catches or those kind of people, or Jimmy Lloyd, or any of these kind of people that you had are kind of like GCW staples. I guess Joey Janela too. But I don't know, I haven't liked the vibes coming out of the company in the promotion for the last few months.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Joey Janela is kind of a tier on his own in terms of the stars for GCW. But so at least, I remember. But going back to your ECW points, to be fair to GCW, Brett Lauderdale, the promoter and owner of GCW, has consistently deflected those comparisons to ECW. I think it's just more of a fan kind of a thing for outsiders that they kind of have those comparisons to them.
Mhm.
I just want to just point that out. Like GCW themselves and Brett Lauderdale and everyone else, they're not actively saying, "Oh, we're the next ECW of the pro wrestling industry." That's just more of what other people put onto them. But they've consistently deflected those kind of comparisons. Just to be fair to them there. But yeah, I definitely agree that some of the mainstays they do have are very limited in terms of what you can get out of them in terms of business wise. Like you did mention Nick Gage, who of course is a cult figure, but even like, Atticus Kogar, I think he is a legitimate, loss to them. Like from the GCW shows I've seen, like that guy gets legitimate heat from the crowd. And as much as you need to have your cult figures, your face of promotions, you need those antagonist figures, guys that can get the heat to help build your baby faces for the future. And if you don't have that, you're just gonna have your typical indie match where like, oh, this guy is good and this person's good, like, oh, you like, both these guys, kind of a thing there. And like you can't have that for every match. You do need those legitimate guys that can get heat with your crowd.
Yeah, and with Gage, like, I mean, I don't know what his situation is. I don't even really want to speculate on it that much. Uh, but if you watch him, it's like I don't know how much this guy has left in the tank as like a consistent performer. Now, does
Sure.
that matter if he's really over? Does it matter if his body is shot? And I can't imagine his body is in good shape given his wrestling style. And I think he's over 40 years old now. And if you just see him, he's just like doesn't move that well, and all of these things. It's like maybe that doesn't matter because he's as long as you're really over, like it doesn't matter if you're actually not really like if people think that you're a killer, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you can actually
Yeah.
like play the role as well. As if people believe, that's all you need to know. Especially a lot of guys have spent decades past their prime still very over based on that ruling. So maybe that doesn't matter, but he's another guy that's like how much longer can you count on Nick Gage as this anchor for the company? I mean, I'm just looking, he's only wrestled 4 matches in 2022 alone, and he took a bunch of, I guess he took like a lot of time off. There's something going on with him, and I think he wasn't on the shows for a long time. And then Brett Lauderdale said he signed Nick Gage is going to be the only person we ever signed to a contract, which to me would indicate that there was some interest from someone else looking to use Gage. But he's a guy that's like, yes, he's a draw for them, but how reliable is he in the long term? And that's when I think like having a falling out with Atticus Kogar, which I wish I would think would be preventable, is a loss because Kogar is kind of like the next generation guy in the sense that he's going to be your deathmatch ace that could be around for 10 years. It is, it's one of those things that I think stands out when you're just looking at the big picture for GCW. But I think they're right now, they're even despite some of those problems, they're still in a really good position to capitalize. They have a hardcore following. They always have been able to do a really good job identifying young talent and finding them and making them exciting. And they'll take a lot of swings and they'll try a lot of different things. I like the idea behind their collective shows and that they're trying to do. They're trying to give as many people what they want, even though it's one of those things where it's like we talk about GCW like they have this really narrow appeal to people, which is true. If you watch like just your regular run-of-the-mill GCW show, you're gonna be like, this isn't gonna appeal to a lot of regular wrestling fans. It's gonna appeal a lot to a small segment, but it's not gonna appeal very generally. But if you watch the collective, they try to do as much as possible because they try to put together these different themed shows, and it's like they do a great job with the blood sport shows. I really like those. Those are themed really well, but they'll also do things like they'll do things like Alley Catch's show or Effie's show, which are like a lot of these like more comedy based kind of goofy, self-aware indie wrestling shows. And then you'll have like lucha show. Like they had the Gringo Loco had his own show at the that his themed kind of like lucha show, and they'll always go in and they'll try to bring in some of the more well-known luchadors from Mexico, and they'll bring them in. So they do try to mix it up, at least from the collective standpoint. I don't think they're like really in that perspective. I don't think they're really, even though I think their appeal overall might be kind of narrow. If you watch it kind of as a fan, you're like, at least they're trying to give everyone something, even if some of the stuff is going to be like a huge turnoff.
Yeah, for sure. And even AJ Gray has this For the Culture show as well, appealing to the Black community, and even like any appeal to diversity is always appreciated. With like Effie and his show appealing to the LGBTQ community, Alley Catch, she's appealing to women as well. It's always appreciated amongst fans. And so, but yeah, like again, like those are very special kind of shows. Like those aren't really a consistent type of thing that they do, but still, like when they do appear, they are always the highlights, especially like you said, blood sports is always it's always very interesting that oh, you have GCW, which is very much known for the death matches. Then you have I guess it's kind of a death match, but in some sense, like in the intent of it, but very much a different kind of intent with blood sports, where it's booked like a sort of shoot fight in some sense.
Yeah, it's these old UWFI shows, which are totally different than the death matches. And that's why I say, like, they do try with like these kind of different theme shows to diversify. And I'm happy to watch Bloodsport anytime it's on, because it is, I think, a really interesting concept, and you watch it and there's really nothing else like it. And they do a good job, like not overdoing it. Like they do like 2 or 3 blood sports a year. They don't go all out and be like Bloodsport every month, Bloodsport every here's a separate touring brand. It's just Bloodsport. It's going to be every week. Because then I think it would get old. But they do a good job kind of keeping it separate. And it's like, if you don't want to watch like some like the stuff that I would consider like the dumb GCW stuff, you don't have to watch it, because it's not on the show. This show is all just men and women doing worked shoots.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a blast. And Josh Barnett has his connections in the mixed martial arts world and the pro wrestling world, and so he's always bringing in either the mainstays like your John Moxleys, or like bad dude Tito's and such, but he'll bring in some newer people like even like Mike Bailey was on Blood Sports. And of course you have kind of a New Japan connection. Sometimes you get on the Alex Coughlin was on a couple of Bloodsport shows as well, and so it's always an interesting group of fighters that he brings on to Bloodsport.
Yeah, I like the Bloodsport in the sense that, like, when they bring in new people, it's like, I don't know how this person's gonna fight, and like, because it's such a different thing. Not everyone is gonna be like this like person that you recognize as like a good has this shoot background, like
right.
Someone like I don't know, like Dominic Garini. Like obviously, like he's got this whole like jujitsu thing. It's like his gimmick as a wrestler. So it's like obviously he's gonna be on Bloodsport. But then you bring in someone like a Yua Uemura, and like I don't really know what his background is. Like probably did some amateur wrestling at some point. And it's like, but what is it gonna be like when he's in a shoot fight? Or Mike Bailey, I know, has like the Taekwondo background. It's like, oh, it's like watching like it's like watching MMA. Obviously, that's kind of what it's played off of. But it's kind of interesting because it accepts the world of pro wrestling. It's in the world of professional wrestling, but it's still kind of this idea behind like, what kind of stylistically are these fights going to look like?
Yeah, they had Ninja Mac on this year. I'm like, okay, Ninja Mac does a lot of flips, but
Yeah,
like I never associated with him like over a shoot background. Like I don't know how like, doing a bunch of flips can help you in a shoot fights, but I guess it can kind of work.
Yeah, he's not like Ninja Mac's not like Kurt Angle. Like he's like,
yeah.
Yeah, but I was interested in seeing it. I was like,
oh yeah, for
exactly.
sure.
That was the kind of the point, was it was like he took his mask off and he started doing this, like, oh, maybe this guy does know what he's doing. It just I like the diversity of it. I like the curiosity. I mean, there's some parts of it where I think there was a couple shows, maybe the ones that didn't have any fans, where it was just like, here's this guy that has like little pro wrestling experience, but is like a low level MMA fighter, and here's another low level MMA fighter, and here are all these people, and it's like, I don't care about these people. Like I want to see wrestlers that like I at least recognized from the independents or from other promotions and see what they're going to do. Like, I don't really want to see like MMA, like a sparring session of UFC fighters. All right, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Is there anything we didn't get to, Jason, that you wanted to touch on?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously, like, there are some breakout. There weren't a ton of breakout performances over WrestleMania weekend. Mike Bailey had a lot of great matches, but other than that, it's like, I think the weekend was mostly dominated by WWE and AEW, but still, like, there were still a good amount of highlights from the WrestleMania weekend outside of those two big companies.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the kind of hype around WrestleMania weekend that we had experienced in the past, and it's going to be tough because we had some lean years during the pandemic where WrestleMania weekend wasn't really a thing, or it was greatly reduced in size. And is it going to bounce back? Is it going to bounce back big? Is the concept past its prime? I think part of it is that a lot of the people that were big fans of independent wrestling and wrestling, these different styles of wrestling, those people have kind of been turned away by WWE's programming over the years. So the same kind of fans that would really be interested in going to a bunch of independent shows aren't at WrestleMania weekend in the same number because they're like, I don't really want to go to WrestleMania. So I think that might also play a factor where it's like, if WrestleMania is not the attraction that it once was, specifically to like independent wrestling fans who probably have a negative view on WWE, but it definitely is something still. It's nice to have. It's nice to have like a reminder on the calendar to like, okay, time to watch a lot of independent wrestling, or time to follow some stuff, and here are some cool matches with all these people in the same area for the weekend, because there's so much wrestling out there between if you watch WWE and AEW and you watch New Japan, or if you watch Impact or NWA or all these things that kind of run regularly, it becomes kind of hard to remember to like actually I should watch some like indie stuff. I know that's what it's like with me, which is like I don't really watch a ton of indie stuff, not nearly as much as I used to, especially since AEW came around, just because AEW occupies so much of my time now as a viewer. It's nice to have the weekend to kind of remind yourself that like, oh, independent wrestling's still around, and here are some, I still like seeing like, oh, here's someone I've never seen before, or someone that I've seen getting a little buzz on Twitter or social media, and I'll be like, all right, let's see how good this person really is. That's all good stuff to see. So I'm hope it continues. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves going forward. If we see it bounce back more, maybe we see it decline, maybe we see it shift to things like All Out weekend or something like that. I think that is a real consideration. That I think Ring of Honor will definitely be running shows like All Out weekend. Why wouldn't you? But we'll see like maybe some things, because that would make more sense to me is running independent shows in the wake of an AEW big event, because the fan base that's going to be coming in is going to be more inclined for the independent shows that maybe WWE's lost over the years.
Yeah, definitely a wait and see and all of that. So I mean, WrestleMania is in LA next year, and so that can maybe change some things this time next year.
True. Yes, it is in Los Angeles, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know I wasn't down in Texas this year, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if the venues maybe made it difficult. I know that WrestleMania is in Arlington, Texas, which is not Dallas, and getting there might be kind of a hassle. So are there a lot of venues for independent shows in Arlington? I think most of them were in Dallas or like Garland, Texas, or that kind of area. Maybe being in, not like LA is an easy city to get around either,
right.
but the WrestleMania being in Inglewood, California, maybe that there's more venues in the area. It's easier for people to get to and from. But we shall see. But this has been good. We will see everyone again in a couple of weeks. Not sure what our topic's going to be, but I'm sure we'll come up with something. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you later.